My name is Lauren Bruce, and my dad has been a pastor for my entire life.
Hi, my name is Bryce Williams, and my dad has been a pastor for basically since about when I was born.
Hey, Jason Simpson. My dad has been a preacher for, I believe, about 22 years.
My name is Ben Holmes, and my dad was a pastor for 28 years.
My name is Hannah Harrell, and my dad has been a pastor all of my life.
My name is Micah Rumsey, and my dad was a pastor for about 25 years.
So, Lauren, could you tell us some of the positive aspects of growing up as a preacher's kid?
One of the positive things about growing up as a preacher's kid is I got to know everybody in my church. I pretty much knew all the members, and so it was just really nice to feel a part of the church and just to know everyone from the kids to the older adults as well.
Growing up with my dad being so heavily involved in the church, our whole family was basically centered around the church, just because that was such a important thing to him and to my mom, that it really provided a good solid base for us, our childhood, to stand on and to grow around. And I think that the fact that he was a pastor made him such a spiritual leader in our household, that he was just a good example for me and my brother to look at, to see what a godly husband looked like, a godly dad looked like.
My dad always kept me in line, and all of our discipline, though, was very scripturally based, and he made sure we knew that, and that he disciplined us like Christ disciplines the church and individual people like that, and I always really liked that. Plus, if we're sick or something, Baptist people just bring us food all the time.
I definitely think that it kept me in the Word more, and it kept me more accountable, and I grew at a faster spiritual rate than the rest of my friends, just because my mom and dad both poured into me, and I wasn't raised by the world standards. I was more raised by the Bible standards and taught to be a woman of biblical character than I was by the world standard.
Well, for a lot of people, they have their testimony growing up in church, and they think of it as kind of a negative thing, that they didn't have some sort of huge turnaround, like wasn't a drug addict and turned my life around because I got stuck growing up in church. But for me, I consider that a really big blessing. That's something I've come to learn, especially as I've gotten older, that I got to grow up in a church, and not only in the church, but my dad was a pastor, and so any sort of spiritual question I ever had, he was able to give me any sort of great advice on that. I was always in church. I always had a scriptural background, so for me, that's a really big blessing to have growing up, because there's a lot of people who are around me who don't have that background, and so it's definitely a blessing.
Explain to me what some of the negatives of growing up as a preacher's kid would be.
Some of the negatives would have to be being mentioned in the sermon. Sometimes it would just be funny, but there were a few times that my dad would mention things about me, and I would become very upset that he mentioned me in his sermon. And I guess another negative would be just the pressure you feel, and the fact that everybody knows your business, and you feel like you have to please everyone as well. And also I think the biggest negative is just seeing the hard things that my dad has to go through being a pastor, and the problems that he has to deal with in the church. And it just sometimes angers me that the church can be like that, and that there's those problems in the church. And so it's definitely a negative thing, just knowing everything going on, and seeing the good and bad sides of the church.
The only thing I would say that was negative would be, for example, has to do with my testimony and how I became a believer. When I was younger, around 6 years old, I raised my hand and got saved, quote unquote, but I never really actually meant it, and I realized that probably around the age of 12, but I never told anybody because I was kind of embarrassed, since I was a pastor's kid. I felt like it was expected of me to already be a perfect, Christian, and to already know everything that there is to know about Christianity. And I was scared to admit that I was not actually a Christian, and it took me until I was probably, I think 15. I was in the 9th grade when I finally just decided that the longer I wait, the harder it's going to get, and I just went for it. And I think besides that holding me back, I think that was really the only negative thing I would say from growing up as I did.
There, like I said, there are high standards, and I said I like that, but at the same time, I didn't like it all the time, because we have to watch our actions so much more closely. Like my little brother's on the baseball team, and how they raise money is through raffles. And for some people, raffles are a form of gambling, even though it's going to support the baseball team. And so we can't do things like that. We have to really analyze everything we do, and that got old a lot.
Something that come to mind right away. Sometimes it felt like when he would come home from work at the end of the day, that I kind of felt a little neglected in terms of spiritual growth. You know, when you have a dad who's in the ministry and he deals with, you know, the spiritual well-being of other people and their physical needs and everything like that, you just kind of feel like when he comes home at the end of the day that he's just so worn out that, you know, you can't bring a question to him or something like that, which I know isn't true, but it just kind of felt that way.
Obviously, there's some time things where, you know, maybe your dad isn't there all the time because of that, but my dad made a great effort to be with family, always have time for family. But I can say that over the years being at some different churches, I did see some preachers' kids who struggle in life because, you know, their dad was so focused on doing the church stuff that he kind of neglected the family stuff. And I saw kind of that split where you have the good preacher's kids and the bad preacher's kids, that stereotype. But it was really true because some kids really fell away from God because their parents were so focused on getting church stuff done.
Do you feel like that your dad ever put his ministry above his family?
Sometimes I did feel that way. You know, if somebody called and was in the hospital or just had a death in the family, my dad put down whatever he was doing and went and visited that person or that family, and it didn't matter what we were doing as a family, he was going to go do that. And also just with his having to study and do a lot of preparation for his sermon, sometimes it would be difficult to spend time together as family because he would have to be preparing for his sermon. So sometimes I did feel that he would put it above our family and the time that we had together.
My dad always put family first over the church, and he always felt like family was the most important thing, and by showing love to his family, he was also serving the church.
Knowing that your dad was the pastor, did you ever feel any pressure of feeling like you had to be the perfect child or things along those lines?
Yeah, there is definitely some pressure of just acting the right way and looking the right way, especially since a lot of times we would have to dress in a way that my dad approved because he wouldn't want other people to criticize the way, you know, what we wore to church or, and I mean, everything I did was under a microscope, and my mom always has said that we live in a glass house, so everybody knows what's going on in our family, and so there is definitely pressure to, I mean, not be perfect by any means, but definitely be the good kid and do the right thing all the time.
So is there anything else that you feel like you should share about being a preacher's kid that maybe I haven't asked or that you haven't covered?
No, I mean, I really consider it a blessing. It's not something for everybody, I guess. It really depends on how well both your parents, both your dad is a pastor and your mom is a pastor's wife, how they treat your family, making sure they focus on the right things in raising you, make sure they devote time to you, because really the only reason there's the bad apple preacher's kids is because the church, even though the church is very important, that's where all your focus should be in following Christ, making sure that you raise your family and devote time to being a godly parent. That's really what makes a good preacher's kid.
I just think people need to be aware of all the pressure that ministers are under, and the many difficulties they face in leading a church, and just, you know, they may be under a lot of stress, and they work very, very hard at what they do, and I just think people need to be more aware of what all their job entails.
My mom has asked me the question before, if you had the choice, would you rather not been a preacher's kid? And honestly, I love being a preacher's kid, and I would never change that. And a lot of people, I used to kind of be in my dad's shadow a lot, because I act a lot like him, and we even look alike a little bit. And, you know, there's just no better shadow to be under, I don't think, because he set such a godly example for me in growing up and in high school, and there's nowhere I'd rather been. And when I finally kind of became my own person, even though it's a whole lot like him, I think that it was well worth it.